Daktari, how are you? I'm testing your mic. Please unmute.
I think I'm okay.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just waiting for just one more panelist who's having challenges. We'll be beginning in 2 minutes. Daktari, how are you? I'm testing your mic. Please unmute.
I think I'm okay.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. We are live from Lawyers Hub. Thank you so much. I can see attendees, I can see participants are logging in. Thank you so much. Just give you 5 minutes to just get everybody in. And great. Yes, I think we can start. We are now at about 30 people and more people will be joining us. Thank you so much. Now, my name is Dennis. I am a second-year student of journalism at a university in Mombasa. I currently am living with my parents in Taru village, which is about 65 kilometers from Mombasa town. Currently, I'm working so hard to revise for my exams and also to do revision because now we are homeschooling and we are accessing our materials online. I'm facing a few challenges because every day when I wake up, I have to go to my local cyber cafe, which is at the center of the village, to download materials that have been sent by my lecturers and to get some learning materials as I prepare for my examinations. I also heard recently that my lecturers will be sending the examinations online, and I am a worried man because I hope on the day that the exams will be sent, I will not only have some money to go to the cyber cafe as usual to download my examinations, but that also there'll be electricity in that village. I think that we are suffering, those of us who are in the rural areas. I have a friend, his name is Kevin. He lives in Mombasa town with his parents. Kevin tells me once in a while we'll get an opportunity to talk because we are in the same college, that he is enjoying the quiet time at home where he is having an easy time revising for his examinations. During his free time, He has time to make videos on TikTok and also watch some movies on Netflix. According to Kevin, he is happy that the quiet time allows him to concentrate on his studies, and he has no problem whatsoever accessing his online materials or examinations from his teachers. He is more than prepared to do his examinations when the teachers send them. I am also Naisenyi. My name is Naisenyi. I am a 13-year-old girl in Kajiado West. When the government announced that the schools would be closed for us to go home because of the coronavirus pandemic, I was a worried person. My heart sank because for me, school is home and I do not know any other home apart from this school. This school is also a rescue center. And now that we have to go home, I'm worried because I will have to face my parents again. And I have to go to face them because I ran away from home because of female genital mutilation. And the man that wanted to marry me 5 years ago, who is 3 years older than me, will be waiting for me at the gate to be punished because I ran away from my marriage. Thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, these are just some of the experiences that have been shared by learners in this pandemic and have been highlighted the past 1 week in our dailies and in our mainstream media. The closure of schools as part of the responses to mitigating the spread of coronavirus has put many sectors at the front line of disruption, and the education sector has not been left behind. Right now, we are experiencing a wave of anxiety over the issues that are happening in the education sector, many problems which we'll not be able to address in today's webinar because we just have 1 hour, but things that ICJ Kenya has taken cognizance of and would be discussing in a series of webinars to come. There are many issues, including the issue of homeschooling and the way parents were unprepared to conduct any homeschooling. There are issues of the content that is being produced by the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development, and the questions on whether the online learning can bridge the gap for teachers and whether this will prepare students adequately to sit for the examinations come when schools open, if at all. So we realize that there is a gravity of the situation and the need to bring educationists on board to have this conversation. And we will be doing that in a series of webinars. But for today, we want to talk about the inequalities and the deep cracks in the education system that have been exposed by virtual learning. And so we'll be talking about the challenges that students from diverse areas, social, economic, and cultural different backgrounds, the challenges they have been experiencing with online learning. And so for today, we are joined by a very rich panel. I have with me Steve Ogola, and Steve will have an opportunity to introduce himself.
Thank you. Well, I'm Steve Ogola. I'm very happy to be here to participate in this important discussion and public discourse. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve. And we are also joined by Pauline Vata. Pauline, please unmute your mic and introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Pauline Vata. I work at Haki Jamii and happy to be part of the panel.
Thank you, Pauline. We have Joseph Onjohi.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joseph Onjohi from Safaricom, and it's a real pleasure to join all of you this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have Dr. Bitange Ndemo. Please unmute your mic, sir.
Okay, sorry. My name is Bitange Ndemo. I teach at the University of Nairobi, the School of Business.
Thank you so much. So thank you for all the attendees that are joining. I can see we still have some people that are joining. We are now at 50 participants, which is really good. And thank you, panelists, for making the time. Now, we will start with Pauline, who will give us a brief overview of the current situation in the education sector, some of the things that I have mentioned, but also those that are relevant to this conversation. In your view, what is currently happening? And also you can also mention to us some of the work that Haki Jamii has been doing in the education sector.
Well, thank you very much. I'll start with a few preliminary comments. And this is to point out that, the COVID-19 is not only a health risk and a health situation globally, but it has also exposed a lot of social economic rights inequalities that have been there in different countries for very many years. So this is the time government is realizing, okay, we only have a very few percentage of people who can access digital learning, and the most cannot access digital learning. And there's not much time to do that, to mitigate any situation. So the inequalities have been there for a very long time. And within COVID, with this COVID situation, we're just seeing the digital gap widening, as you know, some of the private schools have access to online learning materials, and most public schools do not have access to online learning materials. As Haki Jamii, we've worked over very many years in informal settlement. And I remember in 2013, when the Jubilee government at that point was launching the digital learning agenda, you know, everybody was cheering and saying that this is a very good idea. But, you know, 7 years later in 2020, a lot of resources were put towards the laptops and the internet, and the other day we heard of Google Loon. But when you go to these settlements, there's a lot of inequality. People don't have, or students don't have online learning materials. The teachers are not very well equipped to be able to transmit the knowledge through online platforms. The kids also, some of them live in homes that do not have electricity. And most importantly, some of the guardians to the learners and the parents are not literate enough to be able to teach students at home when they're undertaking homeschooling. So this situation, what it's trying to show us is that we have a very small percentage of people who have access to everything and a big percentage that have access to nothing. For homeschooling to be able to be effective, and this is the sort of approach that the Ministry of Education has taken, is that one, you need to have stable internet. Internet is expensive. Getting data is also not cheap. I know KICD has tried to offer some platforms through KBC Radio, through Citizen TV, and trying to really teach students at home through those platforms. But you have very many people who do not have a stable internet connection. Number two is the cost of electricity, which is high. Three is access to the online or the laptops that will help the learner to access the online learning materials. So we have very many people who do not have laptops or gadgets to help them learn. And yet we have a lot of resources that were used to launch the digital learning agenda in Kenya. So you find it's not only an accountability issue, but now we see it as more of an inequality issue where resources are used but do not reach the very marginalized. In informal settlements and in the marginalized areas, of course, you've seen in the news that so many schools have closed in the informal settlements. And these are, in addition to the non-formal schools, like say Bridge International Academy, they've laid off a lot of their workers. So how will people in these settlements access learning materials if the teachers have been fired because there's no money now streaming in the schools to be able to pay and maintain the teachers in the schools? So who will be able to transmit these learning materials to the students? So you find only very small private schools are able to have learners continue with homeschooling. We have KCP, KCC examinations coming in. It does not choose, you know, which background you're from. You're all subjected to the same examination, to the same standards. And so therefore you find most of the students who do not have access to either the laptops or a very literate mother or father or guardian who can take them through the online learning program, or access to data, or even, you know, the know-how to be able to, if they don't have those gadgets at home, to go to the cyber, which is also quite expensive, and how much time will you spend there? So really, we are a society that has invested a lot of social contact. So this social distancing means that investments need to be put by government. And clearly we don't have a lot of investments that have been put by government to be able to have a smooth transition from the traditional learning platforms to the digital learning platforms. And also, what does the curriculum look like, for online studies? Is it just a cut and paste of what the teachers were using in the past, or is it a different system? So I can only imagine the confusion with learners. It's PE and your mother is telling you, now let's do press ups at home, and you're not used to doing maybe press ups at home, or perhaps it's social studies. And personally, I went through GHC. I've never done social studies. So how am I even going to help my child to be able to understand what these social studies are? So we've learned in very different curriculums. And so therefore, parents are now at a very, bad situation where they can't really facilitate learning for their students at home. Another thing I'd just like to touch on is on the school feeding programs. I think that's one thing that probably has been forgotten. Most of the people in informal settlements go to school for nutritional programs. I mean, it's one of the things that attracts students to go to school. So with this COVID situation, you're forced to stay at home. Parents are forced to get into their pockets to feed a bigger family. They had already invested in maybe the nutritional program at school, paid for it, at the beginning of the term, and now the children are not able to access this. So really, it's not only about, the inequality when they're not getting the education, but there are also socioeconomic factors that come into play. Nutritional programs, be it now what we saw yesterday in Kariobangi, forced evictions, those are about 7,000 families that were evicted in that area in Kariobangi. So where are the learners going to access, say, laptops or electricity, or even just shelter, to be able to be in a good mental situation to study from home? So you find, now the home has become a school, the home has become your playground, the home has become everything. So it's a lot of, stress, not only for the children, but also I think the government has to be very conscious on how it's treating, and especially the urban poor and the very marginalized during this situation, because this is how we will gauge whether it's an effective or not an effective government. If you're forcefully evicting people, then where will the learners learn? How will they eat? How will they sleep? So it has a lot of psychological impact for the students and for the families at large. So I think really those are my very preliminary comments. And just to echo on the access to affordable data, I think one of the things that we saw at the beginning of this pandemic is the president launching the Google Loan. A lot of people were not very happy about it, but if it's going to enhance access to online learning platforms in terms of very cheap data, accessible data to people living in informal settlements and the very marginalized areas, I think that would be a very good idea for the government to adopt. And lastly, for me, I think, yeah.
You'll be having another opportunity to talk. So, but thank you so much for setting the tone for us and for just confirming some of the issues that are going on. I'm told by the media team that I did not actually say my real name. My real name is Mombi Mogo, and welcome once again to this discussion. You can also interact with us on our social media pages at ICJ Kenya, on Twitter at Steve Ogola Law, at Bitange Ndemo, at Safaricom PLC, and at Haki Jamii, respectively. So my next question goes to Steve on the same, and just to set a context on the legal barriers that we are facing. And we know that the constitutional legal order has always been disrupted in times of pandemics when the law of necessity sort of takes precedence. What are some of the dimensions that we should be looking at in terms of the law in addressing the socioeconomic rights in times of pandemics like this, and paying special attention to the right to education?
Thank you so much, Cess. As I said, I'm called Steve Ogola. I'm a practitioner of the law, practice here in Nairobi, with a specific focus, a very sharp and decidedly public interest connotation in my practice. And I thank ICJ for this webinar because it gives us an opportunity to clarify the misrepresentations around online learning. And the first clarity that I'd like to inform the public or our listeners or participants is that within the meaning of the law, there is no learning going on. There is no education going on. Listen, within the meaning of the law, there is no learning going on. By law, let me explain. If you look at the Constitution in terms of Article 53, it outlines the right of every child to access free and compulsory basic education, right? If you look at the Basic Education Act, basic education by law is defined as that education that is given or instructed in an institution designated as an institution for basic education, which means formal learning institutions like primary schools, secondary schools, and certain informal schools. And education, the third aspect, must be regulated. So if you look at what the law has outlined, in as much as I'd like to join the bandwagon and talk about online learning and what you can do in terms of technology and so on and so forth, fact of the matter is we are innovating within the challenges, right? And we are performing tasks that imitate formal learning, but we are not completing the curriculum. At best, children are performing or doing homework. Because I've said, when it comes to the regulation of education, has the government put in place policies and measures to ensure that basic education or education is regulated? The online learning, the government hasn't. Has the government taken measures to ensure that online learning is free and compulsory? It hasn't. Has the government ensured that the primary caregivers now, talking about home learning, homeschooling, that the environment there can satisfy the quality assurances consistent with formal learning? It has not. I appreciate that we are a developing economy or emerging economy. I appreciate the challenges of implementation of Article 43 on the right to education. I appreciate the challenges in terms of Article 35 of the Constitution on access to information. And I appreciate the challenges in terms of Article 53 on basic education. But if you look at the totality of the situation where Kenyans find themselves, it is better to suggest that yes, there is some engagement going on. Stakeholders are doing the best what they can do. But I just want to urge the government not to attempt to examine students in primary and high school based on whatever innovation that is happening now, because those innovations do not satisfy the rigors of the law. So children, yes, should receive homework. They should be guided by their parents to the extent possible. But remember, and I like what the first panelist pointed out, if you look at the spread, our children have different experiences and realities and challenges. There are children in middle and high income areas that are able to access internet at their own cost. A cost which primarily belongs to the government, but some parents can actually meet that cost. But there are children at the same time who are in far-flung areas, the marginalized areas, that are unable to access these materials because they don't have electricity, they don't have internet connectivity, they don't have this material, the money to finances to print these documents. So yet you want to subject these children to a national examination. So I think my parting shot, or my opening comment, the conclusion of it is this. There should be engagement on how children can interact with knowledge, yes, and let us continue deepening the discussion on how best to make sure that children don't miss out entirely, but let us not confuse the innovation that is happening with formal learning. There's no formal learning going on upon which the foundation of an examination may be administered. That is what the law has outlined.
Thank you, Steve, for that. And of course, we'll continue talking about it and we'll have more questions on the place of the law. But turning to you, Dr. Bitange Ndemo, in your article recently in the Daily Nation, You mentioned that COVID-19 has brought an end to teaching as we know it, and that it will never be the same. So please shed some light and give us an overview of this comment on what we expect and what the future of education looks like. Then before we can talk about if we have the right infrastructure to actually support where the education is going.
Thank you for the question. I come from a philosophy that we always must think positively. In the sense that questions that we should be asking the government.
We can't hear you. I think you would want to turn up the volume on your machine. Yes. 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 Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh God. Okay. We can't hear you. We can't hear you, sir. Please mute and unmute. Please mute and then unmute so we see if that can be solved. Yes, now please unmute. So yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes, now we can hear you. Thank you so much.
Okay. I say thank you so much for inviting me to this webinar. And if you see my previous article and the one that is coming this week, I'm looking at the whole issue from a very positive side. I think we are asking wrong questions to the government because we are in a crisis. I mean, if you are in a boat which capsizes, it is not that time you begin to ask, why did this boat not have the life jackets? The first thing you do is to save yourself in whatever way you do. Then you start asking the right questions. As I speak to you now, the mobile phone subscription in this country has gone over 100%. The broadband coverage is around 70%. Even if you go to northern Kenya, some of the villages have 3G, 4G. These are the infrastructure that we need in order to cover every student. And nobody is asking, can we negotiate with the operators to zero rate those websites that can provide education to kids? And you have a Safaricom official here, they will tell you, they will say yes, because it is the specific website that you could go. Today, you have almost 80% of Kenyans using WhatsApp to share videos, to just laugh. But nobody has looked at it and said, can we transmit knowledge through YouTube? The reason why I'm saying this is the very question you asked me, the future of learning. The future of learning is not going to be what you look at it now. Even when I left Kenya to go to US, I was confused the first few semesters because much of the learning is done by the student. The professor comes in to find out whether there are issues you can discuss. So I was thrown into confusion because I was used to be spoon-fed by the teachers, and then we are more of exam-oriented. The entire future of work, the future of learning, is not going to be where people are dependent and being told what to do. It's going to be around how much knowledge you have acquired, either through self-learning, and actually the word like the term of lifelong learning is going to be with us for many years, because whether you are an accountant or a lawyer now, in the next 5 years, because of changes in technology, and again, we are actually into a new technology, you get something totally different. The reason why I'm saying this, that the future of learning is going to be different, because the education we have had has been more discriminative than any other period before. Discriminative in the sense that a lot of kids are left behind. And the people have said this, that in any class you teach, I've been teaching for several years, over 20 years, and I know in any class there is slow learners, faster learners, those who are in the middle. Technology is now helping. Artificial intelligence can help you the speed at which a student is understanding, and you provide content at that speed. That is very good. It cannot be that you go into a class and do a general lecture, because not everybody would understand at that speed, because others would be. So what is going to be in the future is going to be mass customization. That is a term you can look for now. Mass customization, where you provide education to the children and they get it the way they do. What we used to have, we left so many clever people behind because they were simply slower, or they had autism or dyslexia or ADHD. We left them behind. Some became businessmen, very successful, because they did it at their own speed. So we need to understand where we are. We are into the fourth industrial revolution. We are going to live ourselves again the way we missed the first and the second. And that's why I'm insisting that we are here now. We should be asking the government the right questions. Can we lower, can we remove tax from broadband? Can we remove tax from devices? Can we get together? This is what parents from other countries are doing. They are getting together, asking themselves, how do we buy the poor kids devices to access content? How do we get people to donate the smartphones they have so that we give it to children to study? The KI, Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development has done so well. They have done the content. They have finished. They have put it on several platforms. They have put it on TV. They have put it on internet. They can put it on YouTube so that you can ask somebody for a smartphone and you watch that space. So the question we must be asking operators is, please zero rate the areas where there is content, and then we can take this. When your father is not playing around with things on WhatsApp, the child can actually study. That has happened. Several places is happening. It is not only in Kenya where we have a crisis, that where children cannot go to school. It's the whole world. Everybody has that crisis. So we must say that at least 70% they can proceed, while we are sorting out the remaining 30%, because the whole of this country is now covered with broadband. The question is affordability, not access. Access is available because of the balloons, because 70% of the population is covered by 3G, 4G. Then TV can be accessed anywhere in this country. If the government, which has invested in satellite TV, if they said, let's provide it in Mandera, they will do it in one day and everybody would access it. So we have multiple platforms. Let us ask the government the right questions that would give us the right answers, not to go on to be talking about negative, the Constitution. We know the Constitution has that. The government will say it is not possible under crisis. But let us ask them, do this so that we can begin to get our children to study.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir. And I think what I'm getting from you is that the COVID-19 pandemic would actually be a window of opportunity to spearhead a new education paradigm, but obviously we are not there yet, and we have to get some urgent solutions to alleviate the situation that we are currently facing. So a lot of insight there on the future of learning, the future of education, and thank you very much for that. I'll now turn to you, Wanjohi, from Safaricom. You have heard from Dr. Ndemo. And the truth of the matter is that internet access and affordability is the key to unlock the potential of the virtual learning platforms that have been set up by the government. What are some of the gaps, in your opinion, that exist in affordability and also access? And what are some of the initiatives that telecommunication companies can take at this moment, maybe partnering with government and also, as part of CSR to make sure that internet is affordable and it is also accessible?
Thank you, Mommy, and the rest of the panelists. I think has spoken in great detail, Steve and Pauline. Situation we have to chew gum and walk at the same time, something that probably we have not had to do in the past. So as an organization, we see ourselves as an enabler, and not just us, but also the other service providers in the market. So we play a critical role of creating that bridge between the teacher and the student. And a lot of initiatives we
Okay, Wanjahi, we can't hear you, you're breaking.
We've done a couple of initiatives in the recent past.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Okay, so I see two things. There is access and then there is affordability. So on the side of access, I think to a large extent that has been addressed as Professor has mentioned. We currently cover up to about 77% of the Kenyan population on 4G and about 94% on 3G. So that just gives you a sense of the scope of coverage that we have. Now, but remember also there is a population, a big part of our population that have access to these devices. So how do they access content? 3G devices. So, and we have a solution called Shupavu, which is accessed by a USSD. So if a parent has a cheap phone, students can still access some form of material. It's not the best, it's not the most ideal as the other panelists have mentioned, but it gives some form of access, particularly now that students are at home and they need to revise, so they are able to access content. So on the side of affordability, a couple of things. One, we realize that educational content is critical. And one of the things we've done with KICD and also with certain private institutions like Longhorn or PUSASA is to zero rate daily access of up to about 100 MB per student. So you're able to access that content for free. Beyond that, that's when we would typically charge. And we have seen a lot of demand for this, and students are starting to access some content. For the universities, what we've done is that we've come up with a data bundle that is at about 1/3 of the normal price. And we've signed up quite a number of universities, and we're in discussions with others. The idea is that the students can access, material and learning material and be able to interact with their lecturers wherever they are in the country. So there's no disadvantage. And I think I like the example that you gave of two students in the universities, one in a place that has, presumably low connectivity, and one that has, is more in an urban area. So with that 4G coverage, irrespective of where the student is, they're still able to access educational content. Now, we will learn as we go. And we will innovate as we go. And we respond to the requests that come, and we look at them and we evaluate them. At the end of the day, we cannot leave any student behind. That hence, the initiatives that we've taken in this regard. I think what is happening is there's an acceleration towards digital learning. It was going to happen anyway, maybe in another 5 to 10 years, but that time period is being compressed to a very short period of time. I see post-COVID a situation whereby some form of digital learning will still happen, even as
So Wanjahi, we are having a problem with your connection. I think just unmute your mic and mute it.
Because of the learning that a lot of,
Yes, we kind of lost you. We didn't get what you said in the last 1 minute.
Okay, you can hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, so I was saying, I see this trend continuing post-COVID, so it's not going to stop. So I think the question is going to be, how do the various stakeholders support digital learning going forward? Okay,
thank you so much. Thank you so much for that, and also for shedding light on what Safaricom has been doing. I'll be coming to that, back to that in just a minute. But just to Pauline Bata, I would like you to respond to some of the issues that have been raised by Dr. Ndemo in light of what is currently happening, being that the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development has this Kenya Education Cloud that is being used where they are updating extensive digital content for students to access. And according to Dr. Ndemo, I mean, we do not have a problem in terms of access. But I know in your opening statement, you had raised those issues. So I would want you to respond to that, and also giving us some of the recommendations that we can do, some of the recommendations that we can put up to government and to education stakeholders to put up front to alleviate the situation, not for the future, but currently, because we do not know for how long we're going to be in this pandemic. And I think learning has to continue in one way or another.
Yeah, so thank you very much. Just to respond, is that I agree with Prof that we have access to either 3G or Edge or 4G, depending on where you are. But just to throw that, a question back to him, is that you find a lot of inequality. For example, if you're in Kilimani, you have 4G. Go to Mathare 4A, your broadband comes to Edge. Move away from the city as you go to the rural areas, it's on off, and it's also quite expensive. So we do not say that we do not have access. We have access, just that it depends on where you are. If you are, in the urban areas and you have better access, you have faster internet. If today we were having this Zoom call with somebody from, say, Garissa, we'd have lost them because the internet there is not very stable. So I've just been trying to, reconcile these thoughts on how these learners in these far-flung areas are getting the same quality of online education with learners in the urban areas. So KICD has put forth some material for learners. But again, it's about, who has access to what in Kenya. So for you to be able to comprehend as a young learner, to comprehend what KCD has put out there, you need somebody to take you through. And I said in my opening statement that some of these young learners, especially in informal settlements, or these marginalized areas, do not have a guardian or a parent who's literate enough to synthesize that information for them. So you find it's sort of like a one-person learning mechanism, which I'm not sure will work very well. You can't just watch the TV or listen to KBC, Taifa, or whatever it is that KCD is putting out there and comprehend. So the assumption is that most learners have guardians at home who can help them, with the learning process, and that is not true. The illiteracy rate is also very high, and we must also reconcile our thoughts with this. It's a two-way mechanism learning. It's not a one-way. As much as this pandemic has sort of changed the way we will do online classes or the way we will do online learning, we cannot assume some very pertinent issues. As I also mentioned, private schools are the ones that have teachers, like me in a computer and teaching a student across. Public institutions do not have that. You're sent for materials. So I can only imagine if when I was in campus, we used to be sent for materials sometimes. They used to download and I couldn't comprehend because I needed the lecturer to sort of walk me through. And that's the system, that's the 844 system that we were taught, or now whatever this other system that is coming up. We are not like America where, you know, students can quickly comprehend a lot of material. We are used to that process of learning, and we cannot assume that even during this crisis. So I think we have to come back to practicalities of how the learning system in Kenya has been over the years, and not try and, you know, jumpstart an online system assuming all these other factors. Infrastructure is there, yes, I do not disagree with that, but who can afford this, you know, data and 3G or 4G or edge learning systems in urban settlement? You know, someone is sort of looking at, do I eat today, or do I buy 100 MB for my kid to be able to download things from the internet? I do not even have the laptop, you know, I do not even have whatever gadget that is required to enable me learn. So yes, we have infrastructure, but, you know, we're just looking at them in a very linear sense of view. So we need to also comprehend that we are a country with so much inequality, and that has not ended during this COVID period. It's just been now put out there how, you know, we are such an unequal society. You see on social media, parents posting, you know, now I'm doing online classes for my kid. We've just taken a short break. But go to the informal settlement, people are getting forcefully evicted. So, you know, I really don't agree at 100%. Yes, I want to be optimistic, but we are such an unequal society, and unless government sorts that, either through putting infrastructure that really thinks about the one who's been left behind all those years, not the one who is already forward. You know, if the CS is saying that KCP, KCC will be examined the same, and forgetting that very many people have not been able to access education materials during this period, even TV, you know, we assume that everybody has a TV, you know. Yes, maybe everybody has a TV, but not everybody has that electricity to be able to keep a TV on for the entire time KCDs airing their things. So we really need to put all these considerations to mind. Otherwise, we will leave very many students behind based on assumptions. And I don't think, you know, that is what the spirit of access to education for all calls for. And I think recommendation just in the short term, I would
Pauline,
say, yes.
I'll be giving you an opportunity to make the recommendations, but thank you so much for that response. And now, Steve, coming to you in light of what has been said by Pauline and Dr. Ndemo, and also the government, the president last week issued directives to the Ministry of Education to set up guidelines to mitigate any uneven effects that will be on the learners. What are some of those urgent and quick actions that we can take to alleviate the situation as it is currently is, and to also deal with the inequalities that have been discussed today?
Okay, just first of all, just for clarity, my main concern was the normative content of the right to education. And I'm saying that has not been achieved. Now, that is not the same as denying the interventions or the innovations the government is implementing within the challenges. We do appreciate those challenges, but if you look at the normative content, yes, as Professor Bitangi said, in terms of availability, Kenya has made great strides to make sure that learning material are available. But if you look at, that is not all. If you look at accessibility, accessibility does not only relate to the physical access that I have a phone, I can access it. It also relates to the economic access of the materials that are available. And our reality as it is, the vast majority of Kenyans cannot afford a meal a day. How will they afford these online materials? So I raised that question. And you know, when you talk about achieving the right to education, basic education, which I said the law already clarifies as free and compulsory, immediately you can see some challenges there because you're transferring some costs to learners and their parents and guardians. You're already offending Article 53 of the Constitution. That is not to misapprehend the innovation that is happening. For those who can afford, we appreciate. But in its broader connotative context, if you talk about free and compulsory learning, and then you are beginning to pass some costs to the learners and their guardians, you can see you're already offending Article 53. If you talk about unlimited free access to education and information under Article 53, and then you expect them to incur economic expenses, you're already offending that. You see, the idea is not to demoralize or devalue the efforts being put in place by government agencies. Ours is to highlight the challenges. And I agree with what Professor was saying, that maybe post-COVID, government needs to reflect more intimately on the kind of changes they need to make, even on the law, to make sure that should we have this kind of challenges in the future, we are prepared for it. Because lawyers will begin to raise legal questions, legal safeguard questions, which cannot be wished away. For instance, I've already said, the right to education, the way the law anticipates the implementation of the right to education presupposes supervision by teachers. Right now, we cannot supervise learners effectively because of the pandemic. Yes, it is not safe to say, since we cannot supervise, let us just then wait. That is why we are saying, we are trying to bring some semblance of symbiosis. What can government do? What can parents do? But let us also remember that when it comes to examining these students, I am really, really doubtful whether on the basis of what information that is being shared, on the basis of proliferation of internet connectivity and access to online materials, that on that basis alone, without assessing how many Kenyan students can actually download and pay for these materials, can actually have effective supervision, contact hours with teachers, that without that background assessment and without regulations, that we can then proceed to subject students to an examination. I am fully aware of the challenges we live in. I think, in my view, going forward, yes, after this COVID-19 is over, or maybe if it's going to persist for long, what government needs now to do is to brainstorm how do we then standardize access to this information that we are sharing, online learning. How then do we ensure that there's effective supervision and regulation? How then do we ensure that every pupil, wherever they are, in marginalized areas, middle income areas, high-end areas, have an equal chance to access materials and supervision the way it would ordinarily happen in a formal school? Those are some of the challenges, but going forward, maybe talking about innovation, and I was suggesting, I saw you suggested that we should not provide recommendations now, but I think towards the end, I'll probably give some insights on what I think can be, what additional measures government can take, which can deal with the normative aspects. Remember the Committee on the Economic and Social Rights of the, especially the right to education. In their general comment number 13, they have defined what access to education in its broader connotative expanse really means in terms of availability, in terms of accessibility, in terms of adaptability, in terms of affordability. And Kenya, being part of the global family of nations, must also take into account these aspects as it innovates. Of course, we will not achieve the standard as was outlined at that time, because we are living in extraordinary circumstances, but we cannot significantly lower it and then subject students to an examination based on a disproportionate standard in learning. For me, that is my contribution.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Dr. Ndemo, I know you'll have to step out at some point because I know you have another webinar shortly after this one, and we are clearly running short of time. But in terms of the responses that have been given by Pauline and Steve Ogola on the current situation and the lack of equality in the online learning, but also taking into thinking that as a country, we need to also put up infrastructure to mitigate future pandemics, not just the COVID-19, but how do we strengthen the education system right now to withstand a future pandemic? That's one. And number two, what would be your recommendations to the recently constituted committee by the ICT ministry in terms of the things that we have talked about, the issues of adaptability, accessibility and affordability of internet to support virtual learning? And then you make some few recommendations and I can allow you to leave.
I actually commend the government for the steps they have taken with respect to looking into affordability, accessibility of broadband. And as I said earlier, access is not probably one of the problems in this country. The problem centers around affordability. And that has been answered by Joseph when he said that they have zero rated some of the content, especially from KICD. KICD does not charge students to access the content. As a teacher, to get a wholesome student, it takes three to tango. It takes the parent, it takes the teacher, and the student. I grew up in the village. In the village, my mother never went to even standard one. She never went to standard one. I did not have a father, but she insisted lazima usome, because in the rural areas we never had the luxury of those who were in the cities. So we would struggle and find some materials, revision materials, so that I go to do my KCP. There was effort from my mother. There was effort from myself to be able to see that I get an education. Where has that effort gone? Where has it gone? That the parent cannot ask, how can I teach my child under these circumstances? So we cannot deal with issues of access and other things, and if the parents are abdicating their responsibilities on their children. We are at home, people have been told to be home, it is the time, whether you did not do social sciences, it is not the subject that you are learned that you can actually follow through and help the child. We could do more before. I mean, this is what I wrote again on the same article, that the followers have as much responsibilities as the leaders, that we should be asking the right questions, that they provide us with things that can help us advance. But if we keep on going digging into some areas, there is no food, there is no, let's solve the issue of education. The government has started to solve education comprehensively, which responds to future needs of education. That's what we call the competency-based learning. And lawyers are asking, oh, some children will be left. This answers the question of inequalities we had in the past, that you taught average students and some were left behind. So nobody has interrogated competence-based what is going to do. And that's what I talked about, mass customization, so that everybody has a chance to survive in the days to come. We are in transition at the moment. We are in transition in terms of employment, in terms of learning. We are in transition. Unless we embrace this earlier, we would be complaining even when the rest of the world has moved forward. That's why we would remain behind. So we need to understand, what is this revolution coming? How is it going to impact us? What are the changes that are going to happen? So there are so many solutions that can be prescribed, and I hope the committee looks at them, that if the child is not doing as good because it's the parent who is close to the children, then we need to figure out, how can ICTs help? Yeah? And now you can help because you have adaptive learning. That is what the lawyer is talking about, the adaptability and other things. So we are in transition. Even government has not created the legal framework that would cover the future. And even if they do, the rate of technological change is moving so fast that what we need to sit back and do is that we need to understand where the rest of the world is moving towards. How do we empower our children so that they become competitive globally? How can we do that? Is the question we need to ask, so that we become competitive globally. University education needs to change right away because our graduates are not employable. It's a mistake we are making because we are stuck in the old. That even the faculty has refused to move with the times and be able to provide necessary education that makes our graduates more competitive so that they can be employable as soon as they leave college. This is this course that is going all over. Um, Development agencies have been saying, oh, reskilling, skilling, but nobody is quite interpreting this to people. We are in a crisis. In this crisis, let us ask the government the right questions. If they are to zero rate all the websites that students go to, let them do that. Then number two, can you remove taxes from the devices, especially smartphones? Can we get a cheap smartphone so that every child has a smartphone to learn? Those are the questions that can take us forward. Yes, there is inequality. We have inequalities between men and women. We have inequalities between urban and rural. These are things where we keep on writing that government needs to do this. This is a long-term fight, but now we are in a capsizing boat in education. So what we need to do, number one, is to make sure that every child who is to do exams at the end of this year has covered the material and it can be verified that the child has covered those materials. We have teachers in every village. We have university students in almost every household. And we are asking who is going to teach the child. We all must sacrifice, like I said, if it's a capsizing boat, we come together and come out of a crisis. You can't have graduate students who are at the university sleeping here asking for the teachers to teach their standard 7 kids. They are qualified to do that. So we must sacrifice, all of us. You sacrifice because we are in a crisis. And by sacrificing, you are making your very own relative competitive. That is what I'm saying. Let's not mix long-term issues with short-term solutions that we need now to overcome a crisis. What if this thing goes for 18 months? We start saying, oh, we are not going to school because the government has not provided this. So that's why I'm saying that access is there. We can teach anybody anywhere. It's just some people must volunteer and they say, me, I am based here in Kitui. I can get a few kids and teach. I can do. This is what people do. This is what other countries are doing. But we keep on bringing very long-term issues which cannot be solved in the short term. So let us work towards getting our children to do exams in December. Everybody volunteers. And this is what I'm seeing people in other countries saying, those who are in this area who can teach math, math is being taught from a central place and the kids can go through. How come people use Khan Academy and they do so well? Yeah, Khan Academy, it is there. How come other people do it, but we can't do it ourselves here? So those are my recommendations. And
thank you. Thank you
really,
so much.
Thankful that you invited me to this.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And I can see we have a few questions on the chat. Please keep interacting with us and asking your questions on the chat. And for those that we are not able to answer now, we will paste them on our website and on our social media platforms, and we will answer them there. There is a question to Steve. No, first, before I go to Steve, there is a participant by the name Reginald Tole, who agrees with Dr. Ndemo that this is a temporary situation, and so temporary solutions will not work, and we need to work around what will not and what will work and what will not work, and we should be very objective in our expectations. He also continues to say that there is need to re-emphasize the objectives of education, prepare an individual to opportunities to make progress in life. And therefore, all these options of learning should be accredited and have a curriculum that prepares individuals to work towards this objective. And also somebody agrees with you, Prof, and says, thank you very much. That is very well articulated. Parents who have never set foot in a classroom sold cows as part of the effort to enable their children to access a world they have never experienced. And there is no better analogy than that. And the tide is unlikely to turn, and we need to ask ourselves, how can we step up and not overemphasis on the impediment? Thank you very much. There is a question to Steve Ogola by Patrick Ngonjiri. Patrick Ngonjiri. Patrick Ngonjiri is also our vice chair of the council at ICJ Kenya. Patrick, if you are online, you can ask your question to Steve Ogola. All right. Yes, Patrick, we can hear you. Please proceed to. Yes, we can.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much to all the panelists for the most illuminating discussions. Very well presented. And also they have dealt with the issue that you're having that is challenging our education sector presently. My question to Steve was is access to internet now a basic human right? Given the fact that that learning is now predicated on access to internet. So if you don't have internet, then it means that the right to education is not going to be fulfilled. You know, anytime you pop into any hotel or an eatery, the first thing that these guys are asking these days is not even the menu, is that, do you have Wi-Fi? What is the Wi-Fi password? So really, can we now start clamoring so that internet to access to internet is a human right, a basic human right?
I think the answer is yes, Senior Ngujiri, especially in the context of COVID-19, since internet is an enabler to education, access to internet now seems like a basic human right, and it has an implication. If it's a basic human right, it means that access must be free and open to all. Without it now creates what you may consider as a positive obligation on the part of the state to ensure that there's proliferation of internet access at zero cost. So I think, well, that is the short answer, unless there's another question.
Okay.
Or unless you want me to make another comment.
Yes, you can make another comment.
So now, there's just, Professor Bitangi Nembo spoke eloquently, and I agree with him, and I think in terms of framing solutions, there is need for policy guidelines. There is need for policy guidelines when you are implementing online learning. We don't want chaotic implementation of the right to education, which in effect undermines the normative content or concerns of what the right to education really is. And when you're raising safeguard questions, it does not mean that we are not appreciating or we are devaluing or we are undermining efforts put by government. So then, can we then have an assessment of how many households, how many children? We have about 1 million pupils in primary. Can the government tell us with clarity, certainty and evidence that out of this 800, nearly 1 million pupils in primary who are preparing for KCP? I'm talking about pupils preparing for KCP 2020. They have almost 1 million pupils. Can the government tell us with certainty and evidence that they have mapped out the spread of these children and that they are sure that every child has access to this material at zero cost for those who cannot afford it, or at a subsidized rate for those who can afford it? What is the formula? Then the second question the government must answer, because now we are framing solutions for the short term. How then do we ensure that there's effective supervision of these learners? It is not just safe to say people volunteer. Volunteer wherever you are. What about the science-based subjects like math, like chemistry, biology, that also have the requirements for laboratory requirements? Now that these ones cannot be achieved now, how will you standardize the exam in that area? So I think there is need for policy dialogue and formulation around the critical concern. he raised an important question. What if COVID-19 persists for 18 months? Does it mean that life will not go on, the right to education will be completely impeded? That is what government is supposed to be preparing in. I would want to urge government to ensure broader public participation, as is envisioned under Article 10, a more consultative, deliberative, participatory approach to the right to education, so that we get to know the basics first. Do we then need to amend certain provisions of the law? Because I said, basic education is defined by law to be free and compulsory. To the extent that people have to, you're transferring economic costs to the parents, you're already offending that, and it doesn't matter how much you debate over that. So then what can we do in terms of budgetary realignment to make sure that we still preserve the aspect of free and compulsory education? How do we ensure that it is free? How do we ensure that it's compulsory? Which means, have we already mapped out in the families who is the responsible adult in that family that can then supervise or help the child in terms of learning? You get? Then what about the aspect that formal education takes place in gazetted learning institutions? You get? Are we going to amend that part of it? So I think there are a lot of issues that Minister of Education need to brainstorm over. But I think bottom line, if I was to give a parting shot, let us quickly establish policy guidelines on what we can do to make sure that we standardize and we stabilize access to information and education during this COVID-19, so that some children are not left behind. Number two, let us then assess whether this standardization can then propel us to the point where we can say children can be subjected to an exam at the end of the year. As it is, I'd be surprised if there are national exam administered in November and December, which is usually the case, because we have lost 1 month, and what is happening, there's a bit of self-instruction going on. We appreciate the initiative taken by government, but we have a long way to go. But for the longer term, post-COVID-19, for sure we will need to innovate and see how then do we merge or infuse the aspects of technology in our education system as we know it today. So maybe education stakeholders, what can we do? So those are the things that I consider as pertinent during this time. Otherwise, if nothing changes, as at this webinar, this country is not competent to administer exam. And as somebody who engages in public interest litigation, I can tell you, no court would allow the government to administer exam without satisfying the basic concern that all the children who want to sit for that exam actually access the materials that were made available, and that they are at the same level, because the exam is one. We're not going to have some exam for marginalized areas and some exam for less marginalized, for the more affluent areas. So those concerns persist.
Thank you, Steve. And raising very heavy comments. And I think one of the urgent things we can do is then push for those policy guidelines, so that the chaos that we are seeing currently and the anxiety from parents, teachers, and learners can be addressed immediately. Pauline, I'm going to you, and also to give you an opportunity. First, there is a question for you that I will ask, and then I'll give you an opportunity to make your recommendations and also your parting shot. So somebody asks, are there disruptions here that can present opportunities for advancing socioeconomic rights and the right to education? They feel that we have approached the situation with a roadblock mentality, meaning that we are very negative. So has the disruption sort of exposed any opportunities that we can use to advance the right to education?
Well, thank you very much. Just to take the question and then to my recommendations and parting shot. So I think it looks like that there's a lot of negativity during this time, but again, it's because of the really structural problems that have been happening within the country over the years. So what COVID has done is just to highlight all these challenges and inequalities at the same time. So we have challenges on the right to education, we have challenges on the right to housing, we have challenges to unequal access of digital opportunities, we have challenges to healthcare facilities. Not everybody can be able to access. So all these things have come at the same time. And that's why you could see many people focusing on the negatives, because that's what is showing. If we had a good system where everything works, or at least, you know, there's accountability and people try to make things work, then this challenge will not be as much as it is right now. So for example, the laptop program that I talked about, if it was working, then as of now, we wouldn't be talking about access challenges and affordability challenges if government used that money well. If government used the money to say, according to the SDGs, you must not travel this number of kilometers to reach a health facility, we wouldn't have challenges of mass testing, for example. So I think this is, you know, in my view, government's doing because, you know, the money is there, just that there's no accountability and there's no follow-up of whether these services are reaching the very marginalized. So one of the opportunities I see with this COVID situation is that with the inequalities that have been exposed, not just for Kenya, but for very many other governments. I think we usually benchmark with the US and the UK and all those global North countries, but we've seen how they've been able to address this situation is not a very smart approach. I think to some extent, Kenya has done better than the US, I think. So one of the opportunities I feel this pandemic would bring, and especially in the education sector, could be one, on the online learning platforms. If we put the correct infrastructure, I think it's something that we could embrace. And so in areas where you know, we don't have very many teachers, then online platform could come into place. But that means that government needs to put in place stable and affordable internet connection. Somebody asked whether it's now become a basic right. I think as we go along, most of these services have been pegged on whether you have internet, on whether you have electricity, on whether you have transport. So basic rights have been pegged on secondary rights that are very expensive to achieve. So unless we turn that around and say that you have basic rights first, and then the other rights can come into place, then we wouldn't move forward. So for us to be able to, you know, have a good outcome out of this process, it's the learnings that the governments will take into place. Have stable internet connection, have affordable internet connection, provide those laptops. They were budgeted for, somebody bought them. So why wouldn't students be able to access? If you're using the other, you know, normal Kabambe phones, then how do you transmit, you know, learning to those students, and also ensure that they have people to support them? Because as Prof said, learning is a three-pronged approach. It's not just about the learner, but the people who support them.
Thank you, Pauline.
Yeah, so just as a closing comment, I think one of the things I would highlight is that, you know, if we were voting, everybody would have, you know, voted, whether you are in a marginalized area or not. The government would have ensured that you have the ballot and you cast it. So the same should happen to education. Yes, we are in a pandemic and we realize that it's not easy for government. You know, during a pandemic, they have to prioritize. But we have to have the thinking mentality of voting. Can all students, you know, 13 million plus learners, get access to affordable online education, just as we would have if we were voting? So that is my part in short, and thank you so much for inviting me to this panel.
Thank you so much, Pauline. We really have some very many questions. Very important questions that are being raised by the participants, and unfortunately we are running out of time and we have to wrap up. But very briefly, in less than half a minute, Pauline, you can just tell us what special attention needs to be given to children that are facing other barriers to accessing education. For example, girl children who are at this point in very vulnerable situations, and I started with that, the story of Nasenya in Kajiado West. There are also children that are living with disabilities, and what measures can be taken to ensure that they are also included in some of these, some of these learning platforms that have been provided. I'm asking this because I know you do a lot of work with the marginalized communities and maybe persons with disabilities. and also the girl child. In half a minute.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry, yes. I think in terms of access to the very marginalized people, and in the spirit of leaving nobody behind, then what government could do and how it works, in the human rights framework, is that they need to be put first. So as we know, we don't have a good database, because in a functioning country, government would have had a database that shows in Nairobi, we have 50 girls who are living with extreme disability, who live in an informal settlement and therefore cannot access any form of online material. And so we put them first. So it's about cues and human rights. And so if you don't have data, if government does not have data to put these people first, then this will just be another recommendation that wouldn't be taken into consideration. So it has to be about prioritization, and for data, for government to know who needs these services first, for them to be able to be prioritized.
Okay, thank you so much. Joseph? Yes, I hope your connection is better now.
Yeah,
yes, I have a question for you that has been asked by Kalkel. I hope I pronounced your name right. He said, could the internet charges be as low as possible such that it is affordable to even the lowest salaried citizens? And you had just mentioned some of the measures that Safaricom has taken to ensure that internet is now affordable, but also raising a question from Dr. Bitange's presentation on the issue of, can we have affordable smartphones? Because then even if the internet is accessible, then we do not have the right infrastructure and we don't have the right tools to ensure that it works. So I'll give you an opportunity to respond to that question and to also tell us how Safaricom is communicating this, because clearly you have done some very good steps that you have taken, but I do not think that this information is out there. People do not seem to be aware of some of the measures that you have taken. So how will you communicate this to ensure that we are able to know exactly what you're doing and how you're helping Kenyans in this pandemic?
Yeah, thank you, Mobi. And that's a good question. So the cost of internet, continues to be, and I think everybody has talked about it severally, be prohibitive to access to education, and hence during this period we've taken some specific measures, just like I had mentioned earlier. If you look at the cost of connectivity that over the last 6 or so months, our costs have come down by about 28%. In addition to what we've done for the university, which is just given the bundles, a 10 GB bundle at 500 shillings, which is a third of the price. The access to KICD content, which we have zero rated for this period of time. An interesting one is Shubab, which I had mentioned earlier, whereby we've actually zero rated for the next 2 months. So that any student, irrespective of where you are in this country, irrespective of your social economic situation, you can access that service for free. We normally would charge a daily subscription fee of 3 shillings, but now we've waived that so that students can be able to, can be able to learn. On the issue of devices, we've gotten into an arrangement with Google, and you'll be seeing this over the next 2 months, where we are going to give, they offer devices at 20 shillings a day. So depending on your budget, you can get a smartphone in your hands for as low as 20 shillings a day, and then you repay that over time. So these are interventions that are specifically intended to ensure that the barrier to access is reduced, and in this case, barrier in terms of economic capability, and also in terms of network. So those are some of the specific things that we are doing. We will continue to innovate with the education sector because a lot of these innovations are in collaboration with the education sector, where they challenge us. So we keep picking challenges from the market and from the sector, and then we respond to that in a way that that makes sense and that is also sustainable. That's what I would point out. There's one last thing I would want to just say. As we consider technology, it's also good to remember that in this era of hacking and cybersecurity, there are certain vulnerabilities that are going to be with us. So even as we discuss and figure out how to embrace technology in terms of learning and digital access, security will become increasingly important. And also when a child is at home with a tablet, they have access to any content that is out there on the internet. How do we ensure that we have certain capabilities to ensure that kids only access educational content or content that is not harmful to them? So those are some of the things I think will continue to become as emerging issues that all stakeholders need to consider.
Thank you so much, Wanjohi, for that clarification and for that answer to that question. I see questions that are still coming in. We have a question from Nancy Chege, asking all the panelists, to also focus on other channels of communication such as radio and TV. And we have done research as ICJ on the level of penetration of TV and radio, and we will be sending out this information out there. So I really must close this meeting, but to thank everybody for attending, to thank all the panelists for making time. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Wanjohi, and thank you, Pauline, and Dr. Ndemo in his absence. So we will pick some of those questions, actually all of them, and paste them on our website or our social media, and have a further follow-up with the panelists, and you'll be sharing their answers to those questions. My name, let me say again, because I think I forgot to say my name at the beginning. My name is Mombi Mugo, and I was very happy to moderate this session. And just to leave all of us with a quote for our reflection as we think about the inequalities that have been exposed by COVID-19 in various sectors, and not just the education sector, that equality is leaving the door open for everyone who has the means to approach it. But equity is ensuring that there is a pathway to that door for those who really need it. Thank you very much and have a lovely afternoon.